Hello, nice to be here. So I have a strange job. I have a magazine, which is original shiny paper form, which is my day job. And obviously we have apps because we have to move with the economy, people's behavior, and we have changed our business model because advertising in shiny paper magazines probably isn't the future, so we do conferences, we have a consulting business. But I spend a lot of my time going to meet the startups around the world, the investors, the research labs, because Wired is about where technology and innovation are taking us and where the emerging companies that are growing very quickly see big opportunities. And I'm going to talk to you now about the accelerating pace of innovation and why I guess it's both an opportunity if you can see in which direction things are opening up. But it's also a risk, I think, if you think business is going to be as it always has been. Kodak famously invented the digital camera in 1975, and it was very inconvenient to their business model. They made a nice amount of money out of shiny photography paper. When it went into bankruptcy in 2012, Kodak had about 140,000 employees at its peak. A 13-person photography company was bought by Facebook for $1 billion. It was called Instagram, and it had 13 employees. And it's partly, I guess, because Instagram wasn't about the physical photograph, more about the act of sharing. But it shows that in an exponential era, and I'll explain a bit about what that signifies, the rules are very different. So I want to get a sense of how quickly you in the room see things changing. I was talking at an aviation industry event yesterday, all the people from the big airlines, and I asked them the same thing I'm going to ask you. How long until you think we will be able to buy flying cars and commute around the city in a flying car? Anybody think in 10 years we will have a flying car? Any hands?
It's been on Dragon's Den.
Oh, well. Did they fund it?
No.
Okay. So I've seen like 2 hands. What's really interesting is it's here now because it's a startup doing it. This is a company in Slovakia called Aeromobile that now has, this is last October's prototype, a car with wings that actually flies. Now, it may not be the way you're going to get to your summer vacation yet, but what's really interesting is the startup mindset ignores the rules of what's possible. This was science fiction until pretty recently, but now you don't need a huge amount of money to create a business like this. You can go to crowdfunding. You don't need huge factories. You can just access through the network other people's excess capacity. And you can forget the idea that no is the answer to this question. And everywhere I look, I'm seeing the rules being torn up. Think of how quickly things are progressing in robotics. This is a company that Google bought recently. It's called Boston Dynamics. They make military robots originally, but now they're consumerizing it. They like kicking their robot dogs. No robot dog was harmed in the making of this. These used to cost maybe $10 million. Again, the price is coming right down, and they can find new applications. And if you think about automation and robotics, this is going to change all sorts of sectors of the economy. Think of healthcare and how technology could really solve some big problems. This lady is tetraplegic. She can't move her arms or legs, but she has a sensor implanted now directly into her brain. It's a project called BrainGate, and it uses her thoughts to control when the robot arm should help her drink. So I guess this is technology solving a real problem. But again, it's crazy to think the interface is now not a keyboard, not a mouse, but direct brain stimulation. And we're going to see a lot more like this. So everywhere I'm looking, I'm seeing an established, profitable industry sector threatened if it doesn't see the technology that's coming along. Think of supply chain and delivery. A drone used to cost, I don't know, $1 million, and you had to be the military. Now any of us can buy one for £150, £200. It changes the way you get physical products to people. Think of materials. This gentleman on the International Space Station a few months ago needed a wrench, so it was emailed to him as an attachment and then printed on a 3D printer up in space. And I guess what unites all these things is this exponential curve. You've heard of Moore's law. Computer processor power is still doubling every 18 months or 2 years. We haven't yet reached the limit. We're nearing it. And obviously that means computers are getting smaller and more powerful. This one out of the University of Michigan, the size of a grain of rice. But it's also affecting all sorts of other areas of the economy. And I think we all need to be very aware of the power of the exponential. The last century, they say in Silicon Valley, was the linear century, where you increased progress 1 + 1. If you were going for a walk, a 30-pace walk, by the 30th step you'd have got to 30 feet away. But what happens when you double at every step? Because it's an exponential age. By the 30th step, you're at more than 1 billion feet away. And often you don't see how far you are on this curve until it's too late. And it's hitting pretty much every sector I see. It's hitting, think computer storage, something that used to be expensive, it is now effectively free. If in 1994 I'd say to you, let's create a business where we give away computer storage. I know it's $1,000 per gig, but if we give it away, we'll be very, very rich. We'll be billionaires. Let's call the business Dropbox. You're too early, but at the right moment, that opportunity arises. And it's not just hitting the computing areas of the economy, it's hitting genomics. The green line is the logarithmic falling cost of sequencing human DNA. It's falling much more quickly than the Moore's law line. So again, 14 years ago, it would have been $100 million to sequence a person. Now it's around $1,000. In a couple of years, it will be the price of a cup of coffee. What does this do for healthcare? What does this do for the state trying to track your identity based on knowing who you are? And it's also hitting the speed at which new companies are emerging as billion-dollar companies. It used to take a couple of decades to get onto the Fortune 500 as a billion-dollar company. Now, we're talking a year and a half. So again, you have to kind of stay alert. The consumer adoption of technologies is also accelerating. If you say 50 million items is mainstream, it's getting quicker and quicker. And so if you are an established company, if you are an incumbent, you have to change your mindset to understand both the opportunity and the risk of not acting. And I think we can learn from some of the decisions made in the past. So it's 1983, and this new gadget hits the market. It's quite heavy. It does have celebrity endorsers. But let's just say you're the biggest supplier of landlines in the world. Let's say you are the incumbent. You are AT&T, that has millions of miles of copper cables connecting the American home and the American office to the network. Do you invest in this? Do you ignore it? Do you think it's a fad? AT&T didn't know in 1983, so they called in McKinsey. And they said, give us a good estimate of how many mobile telephones there'll be in America by the end of the 20th century in 17 years. And McKinsey goes away and does its number crunching. And they come back and say, we think it could be fairly significant. We think there could be almost 1 million mobile telephones in America. Which wasn't a bad guess. It was slightly out. And there's 3 things McKinsey got wrong, which I think you need to bear in mind whenever the conversation turns to technology. First of all, that Moore's law, the form factor changes, it actually becomes more useful before you know it. Secondly, don't think of it as a technology. What determines if something is adopted is not gigahertz, megabits, it's does it solve human problems? Can I engage with it emotionally? This is not a computing device as much as a way of connecting with your loved ones, of saving time, of shopping, of watching a film if you're bored. It's that emotional engagement. And I think the third thing McKinsey got wrong was they framed their thinking in a very fixed 1983 way. And social norms can change really quite quickly. In 1983, the norm, if you needed to make a phone call, was you would go and find the public phone box. You would go to the office. You would go back home. Today, if you take one of these away from a 15-year-old for more than 6 seconds, it's a human rights abuse. And just look at changing behavior. Look how quickly this is changing. This is a slide from Mary Meeker of Kleiner Perkins. This is, since the late part of the last decade, how much time Americans spend with screens, with digital media. The green at the top is the mobile screen. The blue is the laptop or the desktop, and the yellow is other things. And so, in terms of total hours per day, in 2008 we were on 2.7 hours. Now we've doubled, 5.6 hours a day. And that's come out of nowhere. So that's nearly 6 hours people are not engaging with human beings, their children, other traditional media. You have to be on that journey with consumers. And, it's not stopping. So, they're getting faster, more powerful, all sorts of choices. This is the last version. But just think of what it means for how we interact. There's a chat forum called Reddit where they posed a lovely question 2 years ago. If someone from the 50s suddenly appeared today, what would be the hardest thing to explain to them about modern life? And one of my favorite answers somebody posed is, I possess a device in my pocket that is capable of accessing the entirety of information known to man, and I use it to look at pictures of cats and get in arguments with strangers. But your clients' lives are being transformed by these devices, and you have to be on that journey. And you also have to understand how this is changing their expectations of how they buy things, how they share information, how they manage their finances and their investments, the sorts of information they expect from you. And I guess we're addicted to these devices. There's now an app that tells you how many times a day you're checking your apps. And we now have new medical conditions. This one is called the 3-dot anxiety, where you're so impatient, you just want to know what the other person's saying. And if you thought selfies were very modern, I'm afraid that's old news. The Belfie, the selfie of your rear end, is now the thing. This was a device on sale last year. It's a genuine product, don't ask me. I don't know if they are. Although selfies and Belfies are probably not the thing. You need your own droney, the drone taking the personal picture. But there is a serious side to this in that it kind of creates crazy business models. Last summer, Kim Kardashian gave away a game on the app stores. It's a free game that you can use to emulate her lifestyle if you so wish. You can pay a little bit of money inside the game to move more quickly. In 5 months, her free game earned her $43 million. I spent some time with this gentleman called Jan Koum, who came to America as a refugee from communist Ukraine and got frustrated at how much it cost to phone his family back in Kiev. So after a while, he invented an app, which you probably use, called WhatsApp. And then last February, Facebook bought WhatsApp when it had almost 500 million active monthly users. Facebook paid $19 billion. So how much did Jan Koum and his team spend in those 4 years to build up that 500 million customer base on marketing plus PR plus advertising? A grand total of nothing. So we're in a new world where if you make a product, you design virality into it, you can come from nowhere. Although when the BBC reported the purchase by Facebook, they said it was because Mark Zuckerberg saw it as an incredibly valuable massaging service. Which to me this made more sense. So let's get back to the point. So how is technology at the moment affecting, I guess, how the customer engages with the wider financial services industry? So I got about 8 trends I'm seeing that I don't think we can ignore. And I guess one of the trends, if this gets too depressing, by the way, just throw things at me, is when you connect people on a network, they try and find ways to bypass the supposed expert. And it's happening in every sector. We all now book our flights directly. And I think the wider trend is we're at one of those great Marxist moments where power is moving from the hierarchy with the CEO in charge or the person setting strategy to the network where power decision-making is distributed. And this is hitting all sorts of things. It's hitting retail, it's hitting how people are getting funded. I was in Kuwait recently. This is where in Kuwait the sheep farmers sell their sheep. They don't go to the cattle market now. They go to this Instagram page. This is a genuine phone number if you want to buy your loved one a sheep. And I guess it makes sense because it's free. Everybody's on the network. You can send pictures. Nobody gave them permission to turn this into the place that transactions happen. It kind of works. It's part of that distributed power on the network. And that's happening in financial services in a very big way at the moment. So if you want to borrow money, you don't need to go to the bank now. There's all sorts of services, fast-growing companies like Lending Club, like Cedars that help you invest directly. You don't need to be a venture capital firm now. You can now, if you're an investor, an early-stage investor with a nice track record, you can go directly to the crowd. You can go on services like AngelList and create your own portfolio. And if you find a good startup to invest in, you can allow the crowd to join you and you can charge them a 20% commission. So when the crowd is connected, it's very good at creating efficiencies, and it's happening even in regulated industries like insurance. So we're just at the early stages in insurance, but this is a London-based company that's offering peer-to-peer insurance projects for your bicycle. They'll put you in little groups, maybe 15 people with bikes roughly the same value, and that creates a kind of social dynamic where you're unlikely to make a fake claim because the crowd knows your real identity. And then if nobody in the syndicate claims, you'll get a lower premium next year. It's starting to happen in motoring insurance. And it's really interesting, the idea that you used to have to be an established expert to offer advice, to even sell things. Now anybody can do this. This is a housewife in, I think she's in Utah at the moment. She is called Rachel, and she likes clothes, and she takes pictures of her clothes, and she puts them on her own blog called Pink Peonies. And she allows you now to link through the pictures to actually buy the clothes. Last year, Rachel made $1 million in commissions from doing this. So is she now a retailer? She's certainly got influence. She's certainly making a rather nice living from her home doing this. So it's about creating a reputation, a new kind of currency online. If people trust you, if you can build a community, then you have real value. So I guess your challenge is how you can build that reputation, because in an increasingly commodified business, it's that I will trust this person will deliver what they say and will not give me any friction. You are more likely to stand out. You don't need to be a huge conglomerate to succeed. We wrote about this gentleman who 2 years before Apple had an idea for a smartwatch. He called it the Pebble, that would talk to his Android device. And he didn't have a huge team, mostly a group of friends. They didn't have funding, they didn't have factories, but they went to Kickstarter and they told the crowd, the crowd got excited, and the crowd decided to fund it. The first version got $10 million. A couple of months ago, they went back with their newer version of the Pebble Watch. They made $20 million. Again, they're taking on the Samsungs, the Sonys, the Apples, and they have the power of the network and I guess the compelling nature of the emotional engagement they're giving people, and it works. So when it gets to financial services, that starts to get interesting. Would anybody like to guess what these companies all have in common? So OkCupid is a dating company, there's a travel company, a games company. Anybody want to guess? Do they do credit cards? They do, but that's not what I'm looking for.
None of them have an office.
Zynga has a pretty big office in San Francisco, but it's something related to transactions. they all allow you to pay for their goods with Bitcoin, which doesn't look like this because it's not a physical currency. It's a networked currency with no owner. It's just you create value by people deciding they trust it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about not just Bitcoin, but the underlying book of transactions that is built into every Bitcoin called the blockchain, because I think it's going to be very transformative to this industry as well as many other industries. And so Bitcoin itself, it's lots of things. Most of the headlines are about the volatile pricing, but that's not the story. It's how you can use it and how it replaces the established financial institutions and the things that they will generally charge you a fee for, because there's nobody there to pay the fee to. I got Reid Hoffman, who is the founder of LinkedIn and a successful West Coast investor, who's also doing a lot of Bitcoin and blockchain investments. I got him to write a piece for our magazine about why he is taking the blockchain very seriously. And let me explain a bit about how the blockchain works. Again, it's a distributed network, so every Bitcoin has a record inside it of every other transaction, so you can't create a fake transaction. You can't have a double transaction because it's all recorded in pretty close to real time. And the blockchain is that distributed ledger that records everything. And so Reid Hoffman says what's really exciting is for the first time it makes money programmable. And just like the App Store, anybody can come in and think, what can I do with the blockchain? How can I improve life? And so the Bitcoin bit of the equation, although that's now turning into a real thing, quite a lot of people taking that money, that's not where it gets exciting. What gets exciting is, I was talking to the government's chief scientific officer, Mark Walpert, on Monday. He's advising David Cameron on where the opportunities are. And we were talking about, I said to him, so are you following the blockchain? He said, oh yes, I'm really excited about the blockchain. It's going to be very, very important. And we're talking about if you have this public ledger of trust, you can store information, data, and other things on. It can affect everything. It's going to affect tax. You know, you might not need a tax return in the future if every transaction is being recorded. Your hospital records can be stored there. Will you need a passport if your identity is there in a way that can't be faked? It's going to be very big. In the short term, and I'd read up on blockchain, I think it's something you really do need to understand because it's not going to go away. Just looking at where the investment money is going, there's a whole bunch of startups attracting some of the top investors, you know, for storing your Bitcoin digital wallets, people creating protocols and algorithms around it, payment services using Bitcoin, services for buying and making Bitcoin. So, trading services. This is something that didn't exist a few years ago, and it's now every bank, every government department is starting to think what it means for them. So, at the same time, there's some interesting shifts. When you get technology companies that have almost monopoly positions and have a couple of $100 billion in their bank accounts, they start to think, well, maybe we're more than technology companies. And they're starting to look at how they fit into the financial services world. So be aware that some of these people are trying to see where they can take a bite out of the industry. And we're at early days, but I'm seeing some interesting signs. And payments is obviously one of the places things are starting. So Facebook, I'll talk a little in a while about their messaging service, but Facebook Messenger is not so much a messaging service as what they hope at Facebook, the way every business will have a presence in the mobile world, in the world of notifications, and that you will transact directly through this. Apple, as we know, well, it's not just a payment service, it's now a telco as of last week. You can buy your phones month by month via Apple. But you have to see where the amount of data these companies are getting through transactions, through all sorts of devices, is creating massive value for them. And they often don't share this data with the retailer, with the individuals spending, so that's incredibly powerful. So there's a lot of research investment in how we can build ourselves into that transaction platform. This is a company Jack Dorsey set up called Square. They now allow you, instead of using a hashtag, to send money directly to somebody else using what they call a cash tag, just with a hashtag beside it. So I think this is going to get interesting because tech companies know an awful lot about our behavior, and they know how to design experiences that are friction-free, and they have the mindset where they can experiment, and they don't care if things fail, they'll just come back and try it a different way, which is really hard for an established organization to do. So if the big companies are trying to eat a bit of your lunch, so I think the startups are trying to. And just again, in finance tech, London is a pretty good place to have a look around at what's going on, because the regulatory organizations here are starting to work with the startups, the power of the city. It's starting to get interesting. So there's a lot of services like this trying to rethink how you'll spend. There are peer-to-peer, think of the network services trying to help you make investment decisions. This is one based in London and Tel Aviv, eToro, where they show how other individual investors' stock portfolios are doing. And so you can see who the smart investors are, and you can, through the network, follow the investments of other smart investors. So that's following the data rather than following advice, because the data doesn't really lie. We're going to see a lot more of this. And obviously, a lot of the places that the banks are taking value are being replaced by startups. TransferWise is one of the biggest in London, valuation more than $1 billion with some of the best Silicon Valley investors. Again, connects people together, minimizes transaction costs. And you know, we have incubators for the startups. There's one in Canary Wharf. And some of the big banks themselves are finding out how they can work with the startups. So Barclays now is working with a startup accelerator called Techstars, and they've created their own finance tech incubator. And the advantage for the startup is they get access to the market, to the distribution that the bank has, and the bank gets to understand how it needs to keep disrupting itself, how it needs to keep challenging itself. Because as they said at Barclays when they launched this, these guys know more about us, more than us about innovating. So I was in Facebook's building in California last month to write a story about Messenger and where that's going. And you see posters on the wall at Facebook which really explain that mindset. You know, get the product out there, don't care about the consequences. And if it's not ready, just put it out there anyway and then measure which bits of it work and iterate. Even challenging existential questions about what kind of business Facebook is. Somebody scribbled on this poster, no, it's a poster-making company. Mark Andreessen, one of the smartest investors at the moment, who invented the browser, and now at Andreessen Horowitz is making some very smart bets. He's now very excited about the opportunity in finance, and he talks about we're starting from scratch. You know, the new rules are here. In any kind of financial business, why would you go back to what we were used to a year ago, 2 years ago? The banks are being unbundled. And then regulators come along because they're pushed to protect existing ways of doing things. And do the startups care? Well, according to Andreessen, well, if the regulators come along to regulate, then you'll get people reframing what a bank is to do the things that the banks can't do. And he talks about the value of the data that these tech companies really understand. They know who you are. You have given these devices permissions to learn more about you than your loved ones. Andreessen again. PayPal can credit score you based on everything you've done, every click you've made on eBay, that's much more accurate than the established credit scoring organizations. And so we're getting new kind of banks. This is one in Germany that uses the community. It builds up a community because it tries to be the bank that people love, and it recruits, I think, about 20% of its staff now from their community. Here's another example of one in the States called Movin.
Welcome to Movin. Movin is a debit account that tracks where your money goes instantly. With Movin, we make tracking your money as easy as spending it. Every time you make a purchase with your Movin account, you get an instant notification telling you about your spending, how much you've spent in that category, and how you're spending overall. We do all the categorization and work for you. Now you know if you're able to afford to go to dinner with a friend. Right from the app, you'll get a glimpse of how you're spending. No more guesswork or fuzzy math.
So this leads me to the next big trend, I think. The enemy is friction, anything that delays people by a second. Nobody wants to phone you up. They want things just to work. They'll have a relationship with you if you made it easy, because we're in a world now where we're used to touching a button. And when you grow up with this culture, you're not going to tolerate the sorts of experiences that have been convenient for the financial institutions that are a real pain in the neck. So again, just in terms of the frictionless transaction, companies like Stripe are growing really quickly. A couple of young Irish brothers in their 20s. It's one of the fastest growing finance companies in the world now. In Europe, Klarna, out of Stockholm, again, helping you buy things as quickly as possible by bearing a lot of the risk for the merchant, by understanding a bit more about you and your data and carrying that risk. When you sign up with Uber, they're the masters of the frictionless experience. You don't even need to give your credit card. You just use this to photograph it. It will do the rest. That's their valuation at the last count. So one of the other things that's happening is artificial intelligence is going mainstream quicker than I think we realize. And that is something you have to understand, but also I think you can use it. So AI isn't some necessarily crazy future thing. It's here now with your Roomba vacuum cleaner or your predictive text messaging. But let's look at where this is going to go. Maybe not immediately, but maybe in a couple of decades. There's a London startup run by this gentleman called Demis Hassabis called DeepMind. And he's a neuroscience and computer guy. He decided he was going to take on a massive project of trying to teach the machine how to think like a person. Artificial general intelligence, not machine vision, not recognizing words or pictures, but anything. And that is like, you're not going to get that within 30 years. So he got some funding from people like Elon Musk. And then he started building a team of researchers there in King's Cross at the moment. And no products, because that's a big product, a big challenge. So no revenue. When I went to see him, he was very excited. They had finally taught the machine how to play Space Invaders. So they told it just to get the highest score possible. They didn't say how the rules work. And he said the first half hour it kept getting killed. About an hour later it started knowing when to fire, when to hide. He said, we left it on all night. By the morning it was the world's best ever Space Invader player. But this is a company with no revenue and no product. Google bought them last February for £400 million. So think about where this is going to go. If you haven't seen the film Her, this is maybe how the AI is going to affect our lives.
Mr. Theodore Twombly, welcome to the world's first artificially intelligent operating system. We'd like to ask you a few questions.
Okay.
Are you social or antisocial?
I guess I haven't been social in a while.
How would you describe your relationship with your mother? Thank you. Please wait as your operating system is initiated.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Samantha.
Doesn't end well. He falls in love with his operating system. She's got 8,000 other boyfriends in the system, not happy. But think where this is going to go. Already, there are companies that are recognizing not just what you're saying, but your emotions.
Love.
What if your devices could read your emotions and respond to them? Emotioned is developing technology to do just that. Our industry-leading emotion-aware system will enable a revolution in device and application personalization. We're taking more pictures and videos than ever before. Imagine organizing this content by emotion so your most memorable moments are easier to find.
Just at the beginning of this. So at the same time, remember that with sensors everywhere, there is going to be no offline. It's pretty much irrelevant now to talk about offline. Many of us are connected to the network with our wearable devices, or our dogs are wearing a device, or there's the smart basketball that's now got sensors in it that tells how your shots are going. I think we have to assume that we'll get data from everywhere. We did a project at Wired about what happens when the city is packed with sensors. So the taxi gets directions based on your schedule, your online schedule automatically. The sandwich shops knows who you are, knows you're coming nearby, starts to make your sandwich before you get there. The smartphone warns you of an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend ahead so you can cross the street. And this is going to be pretty big. The outgoing boss of Cisco, John Chambers, talks about a $19 trillion opportunity for business once you take sensor data in real time. And it's going to affect, well, this is Google's self-driving car with the blind man in it. It's going to affect transport in a very powerful way sooner rather than later. And then add data that gives all sorts of power to companies that understand it. And I think your clients are going to want to see where the opportunities are in companies that rethink an existing industry by adding data analytics, adding AI. So think in terms of in retail. This is a company called Shop Perception that's doing in the physical store what cookies online are doing, telling you where somebody's journey starts and ends, why this person is picking this item up but actually buying this. Think of a sector like agriculture. You put sensors in the soil. Companies like this help save the farmers money, so you know which particular bit of the field needs more fertilizer, needs more moisture. Just think of Netflix. It's a data-driven company, 80,000 categories of programming they've got. And the algorithm, not the humans, told them that there was a demand that was untapped for a political drama. So they decided to commission 2 series without testing it because they knew that's what the data said. When you go for a job interview, increasingly you're going to be asked to play a game like this. This is a company called Knack that makes games like this. This is Wasabi Waiter. You're playing a waiter in a sushi restaurant, and it's tracking in real time metrics like how good you are at making decisions, can you cooperate with colleagues, can you cope if there's a crisis, and so on. So I guess where this ends is every sector has these opportunities. Think about any sector. We're just beginning. This is a company I got talking to last week. They're using artificial intelligence to develop new drugs for Alzheimer's. Think about material science. I was in Tel Aviv last week. This is a company reinventing battery power using nanotechnology. It's recharging this battery in 45 seconds. This is a real-time demonstration. They think they can recharge electric car batteries in 5 minutes. They're now working with Elon Musk. Think about the world of sensors. This is a company, again another Israeli company, that makes this molecular scanner. You just point it at something, it tells you if it's genuine, if it's fresh. Huge market in telling whether that's a genuine pharmaceutical or whether it's not. Messaging, again. China is obsessed with its WeChat messaging. Businesses are offering all sorts of service there. As I mentioned, Facebook, through Messenger, is doing the same, copying the WeChat. You'll be having conversations with retailers in a much more natural way. The retailer that's not there is going to miss a lot of transaction. KLM is working with them, so you can not only buy your ticket through the messaging thread, but it tells you what gate number. Then 6 months later, you can say, I'd like to book another ticket. Think of food. Artificial intelligence plus data analytics. This is a company in California that's using non-egg products to make mayonnaise and egg substitutes, Hampton Creek Food. There's a company called Modern Meadow that's using plant products to make burgers. They've been funded. And even think of how we engage with reality. It's about to change because of these kind of devices. Microsoft has its own using holodecks. This is a company that's had $500 million in funding. It's called Magic Leap. We don't know what it's doing. So every sector, something about flying elephants, I think. They've put these videos online. Every sector, new opportunities run by technology. You know, in fashion, Google is working with people like Levi's. This is a project they call Project Jacquard. They're putting sensors into fibers so that your genes may be the way you interact with the network. Think of how we're tracking individuals with face recognition. This is just one of many projects we're seeing which are recognizing the individual to save asking for the ID. One of my favorite applications for this, there's a company called Churchix that's selling the service to churches in America, so you can actually tell if someone hasn't turned up to church. So it is a moment, to conclude, of massive opportunity. I think if you think things are going to be the same, it's also a moment of risk. And just in terms of the financial sector, these guys talk about rather a lot of money up for grabs now in disruption. Just in terms of business to consumer payments, it's a rather big amount. And Accenture talks about the amount of money last year going into finance tech as rather big. So, when the next time something new comes on the market, remember this one in 2007, I want you not to do what this gentleman did when he was asked. He ran a big tech company that was making these devices. He was asked whether he saw it as a threat or opportunity.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
How did that work out, Steve Ballmer of Microsoft? Thank you very much.